Hello and welcome to our professional panel discussion on the future of data careers. This is Josh Towers and I will be introducing this session. This session is a joint effort and collaboration across 3 different meetups, including Data Education DC, Deep Learning Adventures, and Data Visualization DC. This conference presentation is one of the many great series presented during Data Community DC's Data Week DC, a conference dedicated to the data professional in the DMV area. This presentation in particular has been made possible with the support of several contributors, including Craig, David, George, Amanda, Benjamin, and Will. In addition, this year Capital One is a title sponsor. At Capital One, our goal is simple: bring ingenuity, simplicity, and humanity to an industry ripe for change. We also have ATA, who has been a core sponsor since the inception of Data Week DC. ATA is the full stack data science company. That said, let me briefly introduce our meetups we have here today. Data Visualization DC is a non-profit professional group that meets monthly to discuss data visualization, data community, infographics, exploratory data analysis, charts and graphs, perceptual psychology, and more. In addition, we have Data Education DC. Data Education DC's goal is to democratize data science through high-quality, accessible, and relevant meetups. And finally, Deep Learning Adventures. Deep Learning Adventures is a welcoming group for anyone interested in learning more about deep learning, its foundations, its strengths and weaknesses, and ever-growing applications that better serve humanity and help those in need throughout the world. This conference is made possible through the support of Data Community DC. Data Community DC believes that diverse communities are better and stronger. Together, we continue to build an inclusive culture that encourages, supports, and celebrates diversity in race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and all protected classes. It connects and brings us closer. Everyone is welcome to come, speak, and volunteer as an inclusive community. Next, let me introduce our moderator this evening, Will Angel. Will Angel is a data scientist, author, and co-organizer for the Data Visualization DC group. He also helps lead the communications and development for Data Community DC and plays an instrumental role in the nonprofit. He has worked at several startups, including consumer and healthcare, and has a background in bioethics and physics. With that said, will take it from here.
Maybe one of your favorite things about working with data, a little fun fact there. And then I'd love a brief thought from each of you about how people can get into the field of data currently, and then what skills they should be focused on. So sort of your past and present, as well as the industry's past and present, which is sort of 2 of the big themes that we're going to be talking about today. And then once we've got those introductions out of the way, I think we can start talking about how the field is evolving. Sound good? Basil, I think you would start to give me an introduction. Would you mind elaborating a little bit?
Sure. So for those of you who have just joined, my name is Basil Stinger, hailing from Toronto, Canada. My background is actuarial science, so I got my PhD in 2013 and have worked in a few financial institutions, big institutions and small institutions. A couple of years ago, I founded my own business called Mondolicity. We specialize in providing consulting services in the credit risk space. You've put a lot of questions, Will. I'm just wondering, are these separate from the panel questions we received? So do you want me to answer all of them, or will we go in round?
Yeah, if you want to take a minute or two and talk a little bit about a little bit more about how you got into data, what you like about it, as well as what you've seen in your career in data as far as how the industry is changing.
Sure. So I've seen a lot of significant change. So when I graduated, I really didn't know zilch about data. I mean, I took a ton of statistics courses, but the problem is at the time you were given very, very nice data. And, you just plug it in and you're worried about building the biggest, baddest model in existence. And it's all about your model KPIs and getting the best fit and everything. And when I got an opportunity to work for a small financial lending company, and in my job description, it was to be basically the best, baddest modeler in existence. But then I realized that I just spent all of my time checking the data. It was a garbage in, garbage out scenario. I thought I was good at Excel, but I realized that Excel had so many problems. Actually, one of my direct reports how to error check all the data in Excel. And, it back a lot because I had no idea that the real world was, there's a statistic I saw a few days ago saying that 60 to 80% of the time a data scientist spends is on data. And for me, before that time, I was 100% on just building models, and the data was a given. Sometimes we didn't even need data. We just would simulate it and then build a model. So it really was a rite of passage for me. And working in my consultancy business, I've realized that it is such a beast. And it is one of those, everyone now complains about data, but not many people really proactively do something about it. I build credit risk models, so probability default, loss given default. And, everyone is so worried about building the model, putting together the report at the end so it can get validated. And what they don't realize is that step one, the data, is the most, they do realize it, but they don't do anything about it, is that you basically, if you spend so much time just trying to get the data right. And I've had companies that had okay databases, so it didn't take too much time. But I had some clients who, had really, really terrible database practices, and they put the onus on the modeler, or I guess the data scientist. You have people who are supposedly specialized in databases, but because you're putting together the model report, you have to go to them and they have to teach you, how, especially if you want to draw data back to 2008, 2007, because it's required that you have to go through a whole economic cycle when you build these models. And it was really it's something I've started to see on the one side it's like a big terror for me, but on the other side a tremendous opportunity, because I'm seeing that people are making the same mistakes over and over, especially at least in the credit risk space that I'm working in. They're still a little behind in managing data. Because as time goes by, you have a lot more data, and then you have a lot more need to scale up the infrastructure, and they're really behind on this. It's becoming, it's still a little behind in how they do that. And I'm finding that the opportunity really lies in someone streamlining this and making the process much more seamless. Actually, our company is going to very soon launch a software tool that will actually attempt to solve this problem in the credit risk space. So yeah, data, I think, is something that at first was a very scary beast for me, because I was really very, very well sheltered in the academic world, and I've come to realize it is something that you really, really have to seriously not underestimate. And I'm seeing that recently academic institutions are starting now to introduce messier types of data. I spoke with I think the coordinator in University of Toronto, and he was telling me about his data stuff, and I realized that even though he's trying, they're still a far way from the industry.
Yep, I think very cool. Thank you. I think that's going to definitely be a theme that we talk about more, is the difference between theoretical work in data and applied work in data, where you have to actually work with real world data. On that note, Leslie, I'd love if you could introduce yourself and tell us about a little bit of the work you're doing at Excella, as well as how you got into data, what you like about it, and what you see in industry.
Yeah, thanks, Will. My name is Leslie Welch. I am a lead data visualization developer and expert candidate at Excella Consulting. What I am doing right now primarily, my focus is on data visualization, but to kind of piggyback on what Basil was saying, more of my work is definitely spent on data governance, teaching about data literacy, and working with developers to improve data quality, because there's often a real gap in communication between the users of data and the people who are initially collecting it. And sometimes those of us who are data practitioners that need to make something out of the data aren't brought in until after the fact. So that definitely creates a lot more after the fact governance work, which is always slower than it needs to be if the whole run is brought together a little earlier. But I think it's hard to talk to anybody who works heavily in data without talking about data quality problems. That definitely affects all of us. In terms of what got me into data, my educational background is culinary arts, but I definitely had a very computer-focused upbringing. My mom was in the computer industry since the early 80s, and eventually found my way into the data field when I was working in a different job, but found that I was really tired of waiting for IT to run SQL queries, and also frustrated with the level of manual work. So I started delving into SQL and VBA to automate some stuff, and that was kind of the beginning. And then I made a big career shift into the data industry, and I have absolutely loved it.
Awesome, thank you. George, how about yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is George, and regarding my journey to data, I think it started somewhere on my educational background. In my undergrad and master's, I studied electrical engineering, and I remember for my master's thesis, I was working with what was considered then big data. We had all these massive amounts of sensors that were placed on highways. They were Bluetooth sensors. This is before other platforms showed up. But the goal there was to estimate average speed on each lane. And we had this weird phenomenon of mixed distributions, because you have HOV lanes and regular lanes. And ideally, you want to report two separate metrics, for each population instead of one. So that was the educational background. And then after that, I worked for Hughes, which is the largest provider of internet over satellite in the country. And really there, I started seeing the role of data and data science and data engineering, as well as software development coming together as one, because there you had all these readings from anything from customer satisfaction, how our uplink downlinks are doing, are we covering the entire country, and to really take that and really make data-driven decision to where should we spend our effort next, and where should we allocate resources better so that our customers are more happy. Then after that, I switched gears to a non-profit organization, which I'm currently at Share Our Strength. We are mainly known by our main campaign, Not Get Hungry, where we basically have two arms, a fundraising arm and a programming arm. And we do a lot of events, especially with culinary events. And I know they're hit really hard right now with COVID. So, it's the least we can say is can't wait for things to get back to normal. But then we take that funding and we donate it to schools in need for anything from implementing better programs for their breakfast program, for their lunch program, for their after school program, for their summer program. For many families in need, school meals are the main provider for them. So it's really hard in the summer, and as well now with COVID. So there with data, we get all kinds of interesting challenges. Data quality always shows up, as the other colleagues mentioned. My approach is to try to go as close to the data source as possible and really incentivize the data providers, if we're not the data provider, if we don't generate that data, really incentivize them to do some kind of basic data quality checks and really show them the value of those checks in the beginning of the data source. How do they convert down to this data processing pipeline that we have in place? So really showing that value with some simple metrics, I think, has helped us a lot. We also use cloud services a lot, as well as data visualization tools and BI tools. So that connection of, again, data quality to really high quality reports is really important to us.
Excellent. Good to have you with us. And last but certainly not least, Justin, if you could introduce yourself, tell us about your current role at Capital One and how you got there, and then a little bit about what you're seeing in industry.
Awesome. Evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. Will, Josh, thanks for inviting me. Josh and I currently work together at Capital One, so that's my connection to this meetup. A little bit about me from a data career perspective. I'm 16 years at Capital One. Like most other folks, it sounds like I started in a very different career than data, I guess. Like I was actually in the applied world, so I was a statistician when I started at Capital One. I came to Capital One as an intern. I was drawn to the culture, but also the predictive modeling and analytics that we did here. And a background in stats was the thing that sort of got me through the door. Over my 16 years here at Capital One, I've worked in a number of different areas, a number of different divisions, but have really focused on like statistics and consumer model building and the data that fuels those things. Today, I lead a team of data scientists, and we're focused predominantly on exactly that, consumer behavior and analytics. As I think about the industry and the trend, the things that I will add, I think a lot of the folks on the panel, I would agree with everything they've said, is one of the things I love about data today is like just the explosion of data in our digital world. And that there's just this massive growth in data that's being captured, stored, some of it structured, some of it unstructured, some of it relatively understood, some of it really untapped resources. And so I really think about like that explosion of data as the trend that the industry is going on around the collection of more and more data as our world goes digital. And really the data career being like a linchpin and being able to unlock the value of that data across the industry. So how do we generate insights? How do we use the data appropriately? I think my passion is not really around getting that data, but like it's really around how do we use it smarter. I think one of the things that George and Basil both mentioned is like, hey, like garbage in, garbage out, right? Like how do we use that data smarter in a way that drives the most powerful insight? I find like one of the biggest pitfalls of data individuals today, very junior in the career, is like, hey, I put more data against the machine and I get better answers. And that's not always true. It's amazing how unsupervised learning algorithms and things like that can find the smallest bit of noise in all of your data, or find the thing that we know is wrong and actually like tell you that that's an insight. And so I think that is the thing that continues to draw me to data today, and as the criticality for success. So I'll pause there so we can continue to move forward, but that's a little bit about myself.
Awesome, thank you. And so I think the next question that I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on are, what are the skills currently required to start a career in data? I know that there are a lot of people who are interested in working with data, working as a data scientist, and frequently struggle to get their foot in the door. What are some of the skills that people should be learning, and the roles that they should be looking at here and now to actually get one of those jobs? Leslie and Justin, I'd especially like to hear your opinions, given Excella and Capital One both have very strong data cultures. So Leslie, what kind of skills does it take to get a job at Excella?
So I think when we're talking about careers in data, that's such a wide range of potential jobs. So I'm going to answer coming from the perspective of somebody who made a career switch without going through the process of spending, 4 years or more in college to do it. So I think one thing in particular is to be familiar with the kinds of questions that business owners and decision makers may want to be answering from the data, because I think sometimes there's a big disconnect between people who need to make decisions based on data and people who are trying to drive insights. I would definitely recommend reading up on truth-telling in data and storytelling in data to get a good concept of how to make that, transition from being a data-centered person to communicating something useful to people. And I would also say strongly encourage somebody who's new in their data career not to focus in on one particular tool or language, because things are rapidly changing from year to year, and we don't know right now who's going to be the leader that's the industry standard 2 years from now. So I think having flexibility to work with different kind of tools is really important, because we don't know, we don't know what's going to be around shortly in the future. And as you become familiar with different kinds of tools and different languages, it becomes easier and easier to, flex and pick up new things relatively quickly.
Awesome. I love that answer. Leslie would agree with everything you said there. Like, the thing that resonates well with me as I think about the data science careers and like, hey, what are the skills I developed today? Like, yes, I think there's all these very like technical hard skills. Like, we should understand the languages, the tools that we use every day to bring value in data. The thing that I really resonates well with me, Leslie, that you said is I'll call it learning agility, but the world is changing rapidly. The tools, the software, like you name it, is changing rapidly. And one of the skills that I actively look for when we think about careers at Capital One within the data world is that learning agility dimension. So is somebody willing to come in and like learn a new skill around data? Are they not wed to like, hey, it must be Java or it must be Python? Like, their ability to actually be fungible within the problem set that we have. And learning agility has so many different angles to it. If you looked at somebody's like CV, like, hey, do we see a diversity in like their willingness to try out different skill sets or different packages and different languages? But I think there's also this skill around like, how do we continue to encourage those that are interested in data careers to like always be learning? Like, one of the things that I've found like the hardest in my career as I've gone from my statistician, through a business analyst job family at Capital One to actually now being a data scientist, is finding the time to continue to learn because that career is changing so rapidly. That's hard, right? Like, finding the space between home and work professionally and your other hobbies that you have around like, how do you find the space and the efficiency in learning because the world is evolving so rapidly, or finding a culture that allows you to do that within your day-to-day job. So, those would be the things I would add, Leslie, to what you added. Like, I think I continue to look at that as a capacity for, candidates across the data field, just because like where we're today is not where we're going to be tomorrow. And like, we all need to move similarly.
All right, thank you. And George, I know that you've been putting a lot of effort this year into the Deep Learning Adventures meetup group and have been hosting a ton of events about data science, deep learning, all of that. I'd love to hear you elaborate on your thoughts, given how closely involved with that very active learning you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I definitely agree with Leslie and Justin that the number one skill you should have is, curiosity and the willingness to learn something new. And with the pace, with the pace of change in technology nowadays, it's almost inevitable. Eventually, after a couple of years, things will look very, very differently. So for me, things, what I'd recommend for somebody stepping into data or maybe doing a change towards data is really understanding the basics of either logic or math, and you can explain those topics from any domain. You don't have to be coming from a specific domain, let's say academic domain or math domain. You can explain those topics from really physics, chemistry domain is that you're coming through. Really examples. But in terms of ongoing education and learning, with our community, we started back in April, and really the goal was to learn as a community. Like, that was one of the main motivators to start this meetup, and we have the privilege now to be joined every week by people all around the world. And really, some of the key aspects that stick out are, okay, I have this interesting data set. It's not in good shape. How do I standardize it? How do I normalize it? How do I get insights out of it? And I know that deep learning is just one of many tools that you can use, but if you go back to basics, there are also very simpler statistical models that you can use to do the same job. You don't need every new shiny tool to solve a problem like other colleagues may.
All right, thank you. And I think one level.
I guess it's my turn.
Oh.
So, I mean, there's really not much to add. I mean, from, Leslie's storytelling and truth-telling, definitely there's a huge communication gap usually. You think when your manager tells you, please get this, and then you spend 2 or 3 days thinking what this is and slogging through, and then you come back to them. They say, no, but I didn't want this. So I think it's very, very. I think the skill of expectation management and communication gapping, bridging the gap in communication is very important. What I probably could add new is maybe a little more detailed on kinds of skills that at least worked very well for me. To become much more comfortable with data, I think it is having a real appreciation of algorithms in general, because it's not just enough that you pull data and just shove it. You have to really, as Justin mentioned, things are exponentially growing in data. You're getting a lot more, and this is not going to slow down anytime soon. So and the tools are trying to catch up, but if just because you pulled a data set, you pulled, let's say, an address registry or a certain portfolio, and you're happy, that's not enough. I would suggest that you would focus a lot on how to get it done fast and cleanly and efficiently. So I would say an appreciation for some fundamental computer science and efficiency in algorithms is something very useful that could give you an edge, and something that can help you in the future, especially as data sets get bigger and bigger. Another thing, and this is, I would say, it would be hard to do until you're actually on the job, but there could be ways to simulate it, like through projects, is some domain knowledge. Because, I mean, also echoing what Justin says, the data doesn't always give you the best model. You can have a very clean data set, but there are a lot of, there are certain things that don't make sense. For example, if you're building a default model and you're seeing that income has a positive relationship with default, and you know that in general this isn't the case, if you're a blind robot, sure, the model fits, it meets, but you have to have a little bit of sense. This is usually acquired when you have a very good manager or mentor, or if you have a project. I mean, I use Kaggle a lot. For example, there's the famous Titanic survivorship. You have some very, very good examples where it's not just enough the person doesn't only show you how to build a model that gives you the best area under the curve, but it also shows you, his thinking process. And I think having enough practice on these two areas, working on the efficiency of managing data and building models, and the ability to apply some common sense, don't be just too blind to the data, but have a bit of a domain idea and think through it, I think can enable you to be a very effective data scientist.
Yeah, and I'd love if you could actually elaborate a little bit as we move into the next question, which is, well, what skills are going to be important in the future for a data career? In this case, specifically, sort of in 2 to 5 years, I think the data as an industry will both be a lot larger and a lot different. And as you said, there are a lot of tools that are trying to support that explosive growth and make a lot of things easier. And some of those tools are incredibly powerful, and if the data is in the right format and sufficiently clean, make some kinds of analysis and prediction and machine learning incredibly easy, to the point where a lot of that, if the data is good, can be automated. Are there any of those tools in particular that are either currently making your job easier or making you worry about the future of your company?
I mean, currently I predominantly use Python, but I've used SAS and I've used SQL. They all have their place. And I mean, they will reach a tipping point, you know, unless certain things evolve, you know, you will eventually have a, you know, slowness. And I I think the mindset of having I would say an agile type of mindset, because it's you know, don't get too comfortable with a certain way of doing things. So I mean, I would probably be a bit against the what I think Justin mentioned of, you know, don't focus on one tool. I don't mind focusing on one tool, but I do mind not listening or not having an open mind or not being open to the potential that there could be better ways to do things. I'm very project focused, so if there's a tool that does the job, no matter how old or recent it is, I will use it. But if at some point it's not good and you know that the tool is limited, you have to be very willing to go outside again and or find ways to work around that problem. So I think it's that adaptability that becomes very, very important in data science. Now, in terms of, to continue your question on the future, I think one thing is subspecializations and going across several industries. I mean, it's no longer, you know, having Joe's Pizza shops and having only bankers and insurance companies worrying about data. Every industry now is interested in data: pharmaceuticals, digital media, even the film industry and the entertainment industry are hiring data scientists. So I think so. This really opens up a lot of possibilities, but keep in mind you will be competing with a lot of people, and so I think it becomes very important to continue to practice a lot on, you know, and the nice thing is that there are also, like, you know, there's Kaggle and these online data sets and websites for you to practice and to really try to continually enhance your skill and show your portfolio so that you become impressive.
Thank you. And Leslie, in your work as a consultant, I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the things and the trends that you've seen in terms of how you know, how these data skills required are changing, especially in the context of enterprises that make large investments in tools to improve quality of life and productivity.
Sure. I think it's a pretty common idea at many large organizations and small as well, that bringing in this new tool to help visualize their data is going to make it easy for them to access the answers that they want at their fingertips, and that it's just going to solve all of their data problems. And that is never the case, because as we talked about earlier, there is, I have yet to run across an organization that doesn't have a data quality issue, and taking your messed up data and shoving it through a system that helps you visualize it more easily doesn't answer the questions you want to ask. It answers what's wrong with your data. And so, you know, there's some intrinsic value in the fact that visualization does help expose some problems with data that you might not otherwise have found. But I do think, you know, that skill set of being able to, like, actively think about if the results that you're getting make sense, and question it and go back and see how you can, you know, help shift things in a cleaner data perspective is pretty helpful. I also think, you know, even before COVID, I think more and more companies were needing help with their web data, which everyone is just gathering all of this data and not really knowing how to implement it, not really knowing how to use it, or how to even collect it in the first place. And then they amass a huge amount of data and are looking for someone to gain some insights from that. So I think I would also say even more so now, as companies are shifting to focusing more on their digital audience, becoming familiar with how some of the major players collect data from like Google Analytics and Adobe Analytics. And they're strange data sets. I think if you haven't worked with web data before, you're in for a lot of questions and a lot of surprises and a lot of things that are going to be fuzzy in some way, not very concrete, distinct answers because of the way that people collect things. So I would say learning a little bit about how that kind of data is collected, and also just having a good understanding of, you know, if the data is really surprising, dig into it. Don't just assume either it's messy and we can't do anything about it, or wow, that's really surprising and it must be true because the data says so. But keep asking questions, not just as you're learning new things, but as you're looking at the data, keep asking questions, and that will help refine the data that you're working with.
Will, I think
Will.
that you're...
Oh, I am muted. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yep. Yeah, just wanted to say thank you, Leslie, and that really resonates with me because my pathway into a career in data was through web and marketing analytics.
It's weird.
So, yeah, it's very strange data, and also one of the areas where a lot of companies really start becoming data driven because there is so much data there. And I'll add a quick comment and then turn it over to Justin to talk a little further about. But I think one of the things that we are seeing is a sort of bifurcation in and an increasing differentiation in various different types of data roles. You've got sort of data scientists like Basil who are looking, you know, at algorithms and, you know, building predictive systems. And then there's also a huge number of roles just for people who are comfortable working in tools a little bit more powerful than Excel. You know, data analysts working in Tableau, people who are comfortable with Google Analytics, some SQL, data visualization. So there's a huge number of different roles beyond just data science. And so, Justin, I'd love to hear a little bit about of your perspective about that in terms of how Capital One is, you know, growing data skills across the whole organization.
I sort of laugh a little bit because like you're describing this world that we live in, Capital One already, where, you know, there is not homogeneity in what is called a like data scientist role anymore, right? There is this concept of like, hey, there's data scientists, then there's like really data scientists that do DevOps. There's data scientists that actually are like data engineers or software engineers. There's also machine learning experts. Like the list goes on. I found that like the data field has grown massively, and then like we have a lot of specialized skills within that. I think there's a couple things to react to in the conversation that we're having right now. I loved the conversation that we were just having on like, hey, how data is moving closer to what I would call like the heartbeat of our companies. It's like, it used to be that, hey, like data sat over here, people that managed it, they did all the work for it, then they passed data around. But as data has exploded, the level of expectations of understanding that data and the people that can do that are shifting more and more to the central parts of the organization that are critical to the decisions that we have to make. And so as I think a little bit about the careers that Capital One is creating and investing from a data perspective, you know, it's around, I think, a couple things, right? It's around diversity of skill and how we continue to cultivate that diversity. So Basil, you mentioned a little bit about, hey, how do we have this combination of, you know, wide and deep across an organization? And like, hey, everybody should have some perspective that's relatively wide, but you still need potentially very deep skill sets within certain specialties. And so I think data science is at Capital One, and just really the data community at Capital One is really trying to do a good job around creating opportunities for individuals to invest, learn, and grow, not only deeply within their areas of like maybe passion or expertise, but also has an opportunity to view broadly the skill sets across Capital One. And I think that too, number two is that comes with like, hey, that data journey moving closer to like what is critical for us to be successful as a business. And so you're moving closer and closer to like, hey, the decisions that you want to make as a company, like how do you want to drive outcomes based off of data-driven insights? And so I think there's just a whole lot of training also happening on a lot of what Leslie was describing around, hey, understanding your data, the intuition that you apply, the human interaction with your data that's important to bring that forth to the way that insights are brought to market. I think the one thing that we haven't talked about that's worth throwing out here with this group too, and it's something that maybe it's more specific, like maybe it's more locally with me, but when I think about the future of data, one of the things I'm still waiting to see play out is like how cybersecurity is going to play in this environment. And it's not just around like, hey, I put my data in the cloud and like AWS manages the tokenization of that thing. But with data storage being so cheap, I'm sure everybody on this call probably has data in some cloud environment that they own, whether it's personal or work, that they probably haven't touched in over a year. Like that creates risk. If that data ever gets loose, gets like hacked into, like what is getting lost out there? And so I have this like, I wouldn't say worry, but there's this really interesting direction of like, how close is our data careers going to get to like managing the security and the privacy of the data that we're actually messing with every day as we continue to collect more and more data? How do you either tokenize it in a way that it can't be, accessed? How do you store data that's, personally identifiable separately from other data? And I think in a world where I've come from over my 16 years, you took a lot of that for granted in a a data center community. Like your data is actually on my laptop. Like the only way it gets compromised is if my laptop gets stolen when I leave the office. And now it's actually my data sits in some warehouse. I'm here in Northern Virginia, and there's a huge AWS place. Like it's actually 5 minutes down the road. I'm probably closer to it now than I've ever been. Like it actually sits there now, and it travels. And so I'm very interested to see like where that goes. And I think, these data careers are going to be really interesting to see. We've blended that, hey, a statistician or an analyst to like now there's more software engineering and DevOps to like, hey, like when do we start thinking about security of data and just the management of data that's in there? We collect a lot of it, we manipulate it, we store it, and then we put it somewhere after we use it. And then like, what do we do with it? There has to be retention that we think about. There has to be rules that we think about. And with the cost of data storage so cheap, I think that is something that's like the last thing a lot of us think about, which is like, hey, what do I do with that data I just finished using? So I'll throw that out there as like maybe an orthogonal future skill set for us as a data community. And definitely be open to the other panelists' thoughts there. I just think it's something that we're probably heading towards. It's a solution we have to figure out, but I think it's fascinating to think about.
Yeah, that is a great thought. And there's a really cool panel by the, last night by the folks at Primer AI Labs about legal liability in around deploying machine learning and AI models, which I think is going to be probably one of the up and coming areas in data, especially around predictive analytics, is making sure that models are fair and that they're not biased in unknown ways, which requires a lot of explainability. And George, I'd love to hear a little bit of your thoughts on sort of what aspects, either specifically of deep learning and what you're looking at, or alternative question, more on the business side, what sorts of skills are in increasing demand there?
Yeah, great questions. I'll start with the business side. And in terms of demand, definitely the ability to integrate sources is number one. We live in a world now where basically new app every other day, and there's a new data source or revenue source coming from that app, and it's basically a new channel for your business. So integration is key, and as long as both systems have some kind of a standard API that they follow. I think that should be straightforward, but the ability to go through documentation, and figuring out, okay, I want just this basic piece of information, I want it in this format or encrypted and this and that. I think the easier that becomes will be important for both data consumers and data producers, as I call them. I'm still thinking about Justin's thought about security. That's always in everybody's mind as well. So we kind of take it as a layer that if I use this platform, security is there, but it should be almost as part of our data culture, that we should have that as plan B, plan C, plan D. If something fails, what do we do? Do we have an alternate backup? Do we have a multi-cloud maybe solution that something regional, happens, we don't have access to it, or we lose access for it momentarily? That's
Right.
number one. Number two is in terms of explainability. Yeah, absolutely. The classical approaches, statistical approaches and machine learning approaches, they're way better at this than the newer technologies like deep learning. And that's something that keeps showing up, especially in life and death situations for industries like healthcare, right? Or law, where you're making a decision. How do you know that that was made based on valid reasons, and it's not just a black box that's making all these decisions? And a lot of it actually comes from the data that the models were trained on. So that takes us back to the data source and data validation issues and bias that the data might have itself. So it's not just an approach or modeling solution. It's actually going all the way back to the data source and making sure that you don't have any bias or other phenomena tricking in your data.
Right. That makes sense. Very cool. So I think in about 5 minutes, we're going to move over to questions from the audience. But first, I'd love to get each of you to spend about a minute talking about what people can do to future-proof their careers in data. Basil, you want to start us off?
Sure. It's rather a question. I can't give you a one-size-fits-all answer, even.
Well, how about a 1 minute fits answer?
A 1 minute fits. Okay, so I'll assume two scenarios. Scenario one, you're still a student and you haven't gotten a job yet, and you, let's say, have a few years ahead and you are interested in data science. So I would say the simple thing is to, in your university or college, take data science courses. Another thing I would say, which is even more important, is to do projects. It's much more impressive to tell a potential employer that you built a website that can recognize cats than to say that you wrote a script that can tell you yes for cats, no for dogs, or something. So I would say try to work on a lot of projects that you can basically describe to a potential employer in a few seconds. I would also say, alongside the project it will give you also exposure to certain domains. So if you're interested in insurance or in finance, if you do projects related to finance and you can describe it in a few seconds, that will make you more impressive.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Let me just give you scenario two, which is someone who's already, that was actually my scenario, is because I already finished and I realized I was pretty clueless with data, so I had to take a lot of courses. Online MOOCs can be helpful, but also doing projects also. So that's it.
Cool, thank you. Leslie, what can people do to future-proof their data careers?
Yeah, so I think number one, and I'm going to answer this primarily for someone in data visualization, but this also applies to some other data areas that I've worked in. Familiarize yourself with different tools and ways of doing things, and when you see new stuff coming out, like, get excited about it, dig into it. Don't get comfortable with the thing that you can do really well that other people maybe don't do really well. Keep going into new uncomfortable spaces and learning new things, and take the time to get excited about new stuff, because there's always going to be new stuff. And then the other piece is just, there's a huge gap between data teams that don't actually understand the content of the data that they're working with and business teams that don't know how to talk about the data. to ask the right questions. So, you know, get comfortable with the concept of like how to speak to business people and how to speak to the more technical people, because if you can, you know, bridge the gap, which I think if you work in data viz, you kind of have to do that on a regular basis. So you have to have a dabbling of the deeper, more technical stuff, but you also have to understand, you know, how to pull the right questions out of the business users.
Yep. Delivering that business value is absolutely critical. Justin?
I don't think my answer is too different from what we've talked about. If you want a career in data, I think it like for me, it's like create the capacity to learn. Like this world's constantly changing. I think it's really around, you know, the habits that you develop as a professional or even as a student that creates the curiosity to learn, the desire to test and fail, and like the interest in being different, right? Like data people are different than business people. I think that's okay. We should embrace that aspect of our lives. And you know, so for me, it's all around that. Like your career in data is going to be dictated by like your willingness to like evolve with the industry. I frankly don't know if that's much different than any other job family, to be honest with you. But you know, that's the thing that I would lean on for sure.
Last but not least, George?
Absolutely agree with our colleagues here. Yeah, big fan of MOOCs, been taking them for a while and exploring them with our deep learning community as well. Absolutely agree with Leslie there, and bridging the gap between business and data or technical roles. I would say if you really want to future-proof your role, there are two things to do. One is find a domain that really excites you. It could be anything. It could be, you know, sports analytics, could be health analytics, it could be marketing, could be anything you want. And really carve a little bit of space around that field, because what I've seen recently, you're not just data aware, you're data aware, but you specialize in a specific field. So if you have a field that really draws your attention, I'd say focus a little bit there. You can say that, you know, you're data aware or data expert with specialization in marketing, for example, or healthcare or something similar. The other thing is the continuous learning. To me, I see us as we're humans of habit. So for me, it really helps when you learn something and you have like an accountability partner. That's also another reason why I started the meetup of, okay, I know that every week I will learn something new with a larger team, a larger group. I better make sure that I have it on my calendar each week to put some time away and learn something new, because guess what? At the end of the week, I have to present something. I have to talk about it with my colleagues. So really, it's almost like a workout schedule where you don't want to do it. You might be tired one day. You have too many things. Life gets in the way, but you really have to make a routine out of it. And most importantly, have fun, because if you're not having fun, after 2-3 months, it's just going to go away. So check out Kaggle, check out some other competitions, check out some other things that are fun and exciting, and, you know, use that as fuel to keep learning.
Awesome, thank you. So now we're going to transition into the Q&A period. A number of people have already shared questions in the chat. Keep posting those in the chat, and we'll get around to them in a moment. So before I ask the first question, I'm going to set a little bit of context and really echo one of the things that I've heard about what the future, really the present, but also the future of careers in data look like, and that's providing business value. And generally, you know, a career involves working with and for other people, and a lot of the current conversations on the more technical side, things like machine learning operations, really putting, you know, going from data to value is, I think, going to be one of the really important things. And that also touches on the communication that's come up repeatedly in this discussion, and that it's incredibly valuable to be able to bridge that gap between the technical knowledge, the data, and what people and stakeholders actually care about. And I'm going to use that as a segue into our first question, which is, should I pursue data science or business analysis? I have a background in physics, but like overseeing projects and leading others. Leslie, what are your thoughts?
I that one's a little bit tricky for me because if you're talking about pursuing a whole new degree, I don't know what the data field is going to look like at the end of that. So I would almost challenge someone if you're not sure which direction you're going in to look for a role where you can get a little more, get your hands dirty a little bit and start working with stuff and figure out what direction you want to go in to determine whether or not pursuing that degree is something that you need, or if it's more of a learn on the job type of situation. There's also a lot of data science boot camps out there that work fast, you learn a lot, and they have really high rates of employment after people end the schools. And I think sometimes they're able to be a little more like current, like this is the state of things today, relevant to what people are learning, especially if you're transitioning careers. So I would also encourage someone to, kind of look into some of those more like rev you up and get you going options versus pursuing a whole nother 4-year degree without knowing exactly where you're going to wind up afterwards.
Right. That makes sense. And I guess, Justin, sort of quick question. Does Capital One employ both data scientists and business analysts?
Yes.
Well, then neither of those could be terrible choices.
They do. So, yeah.
And I guess a sort of question, another question from the audience that I think is probably better for Basil or George. The question is, I'm the first data scientist in my organization. I've set up a group to help train others in various data skills, set up an internal blog, had it in training and deploying models, and have been pushing for more sophisticated infrastructure. What advice do you have for a first data scientist, and how can they sort of frame that when talking with recruiters?
You want to take that, George?
Go, Basil.
Well, congratulations. I was technically the first data science in one of the companies I worked in, and it's very, going back to what Leslie was mentioning about truth-telling and storytelling data, it's going to become more crucial than ever, because if you're the only mad scientist or techie in a certain field and no one understands you or misinterprets you, it's going to be really painful for you to get your message across or to, feel that you can grow. So I would say the advice is really a lot on translating the data. I think, Will, you mentioned business value. I think it becomes more important than ever. You're not in a culture that, that are just, that are people like you and you can speak your own language. You have to be able to translate everything you do into something valuable and exciting. So that would be the advice is to make sure that when you communicate something that they understand, and when they ask you for something, you could do some active listening by saying, when you ask me this, is this what you want me to do? So I'll just make sure you have to be very airtight in making sure that you guys are speaking the same language, and that because you're the only one, or now you have your team, but you're the most experienced person in that. So you want to be the go-to person, and the CEO can talk to you, the CFO can talk to you.
Right, excellent. That comes pretty close to answering the next question of that communication gap in terms of how do you bridge that gap and how do you find your own blind spots and limitations. George, do you want to contribute to that question?
Yeah. And I'll leave this in my current work. So I think the best approach there would be to, as a data expert in your field or in your company, would be to have those business skills developed as well, or at least have somebody in your team that has those business skills developed as well. And usually for me, it works the other way around as well, having somebody from the business side who is a little bit more knowledgeable on the different technologies that you use. So it's almost like a smooth transition to really bridge this gap. You need somebody who has a little bit of overlap on both technical and business, as well as on the business side who has a little bit of overlap with technicality. If that is not the case for your environment, again, making sure maybe a data literacy or data 101 or data vocabulary would be something you could explore, or data dictionary, or what does this concept mean to you in technical terms, and what does it actually mean in business terms. And it's a bit of training, but eventually you will see that when you learn this vocabulary, you'll end up using the words as understood correctly by both teams, and eventually that will bridge those miscommunications or that bridge even more.
Excellent answer. The next question is sort of how do you move and transition between domains? And for that learning ability that we've all discussed as being so important, how do you show that on a resume? I know I've certainly seen a number of resumes, my own potentially included, that seem to just list every data science and data tool for the last 20 years. How, besides saying, quick learner, how can we actually communicate that in the form of a resume? Justin, I assume you've seen a lot of resumes given your role. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So I think the second one is a little easier to answer than the first. So the second one, from a learning agility perspective, yes, it's a part of hey, what's the list on your CV, right? So as Python, Scala, whatever the list is. What I more importantly look for is when you look at experience and the results driven in those experiences, are we finding places where within a function, an individual, or across a set of roles that individual had, are they demonstrating competencies across multiple sets? If I see a resume where somebody says hey, it's developed Python solution A, developed Python solution B, delivered value with Python solution C, is that a bad thing? No. Python's a super powerful tool. We should be valuing that. But it does then beg the question, one of the first things I'll ask in the screen is hey, did you explore other tools? Right? Have you tried other things? Why Python? Because I think the thing that you want to keep in mind, the root of that question is not that I just want to see if you're balanced across skills, but hey, are you aware of where the risks lie across the tools that you use? You talk about data all the time and the tools for consuming that data. One of the biggest risks that you want to make sure people avoid is that they assume that, hey, there's one tool that works for everything and there is no failure mode to it. And that doesn't exist. Everything has a failure mode. And so how informed is the individual on those? So for me, I think about if you're positioning your responsibilities in your history, it's really around show a breadth of influence and outcomes across a tool suite. And show that hey, I'm not a one size fits. I'm not a one trick pony, I guess is the slang thing you would say. But hey, I used Python, but maybe it's hey, I used gradient boosted machines in this one, but scikit-learn in this one, and in this one maybe it's pure pandas operations, whatever the answer is. But show that breadth. That's how I think about it. I think to pivot to the first question from this, is how do you transition? Well, I'm probably the worst person to answer this on the panel because I've worked at one company for 16 years and I haven't transitioned at all other than within the company. I guess my best piece of advice is we're doing it, get experience, talk to people, create connections on LinkedIn, ask. I think your biggest ability to, transition between domains is finding an advocate that is that wants to champion you. Right. And whether that's in Capital One or outside of Capital One, what you're really looking for is somebody that says this person has a skill I'm interested in and I'm willing to invest in. And I think the only way you get there is, building relationships that are, horizontal, cross-functional. And so even within the DOJ, I'd be willing to bet, I know Capital One employs a number of ex-DOJ folks. Find them on LinkedIn. Those are your connections. I think in this digital world, it's so much easier to find people that are potentially doing something you could be interested in, try to make that connection. But again, I'm the 16-year only Capital One guy. So I definitely would like to hear other folks' thoughts there.
Yeah. So we're now past 6:30. So I'm going to use the last question as an excuse to start wrapping up. And that last question, I think it's a little bit related to Justin spending 16 years at Capital One, is how do your companies / organizations actively encourage and reward continual learning? And I'm actually going to give this one to Leslie as an excuse to answer that and make any closing announcements about Excella, for example, who I believe is just about always hiring.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, we are always hiring. So one of the things that I actually really appreciate about working for Excella is that we have two separate paths for growth, and one of them is called the expert path. There may be some minor level of managing other expert candidates or experts, but in the expert path, you are expected to continue to learn and develop your depth and breadth of knowledge in your skill area, and contribute back to the community, contribute to the internal Excella community, and do mentorship and meetups and write blogs. And there's a variety of ways that you can engage. Not everybody engages in every way, but we actually have a career path that goes pretty significantly far without you having to get away from the technology and move into management. So I would say that's one way that Excella definitely encourages the continual learning, because we have a whole avenue that's devoted towards people who really just want to be really, really good at what they do. And as a consulting company, it makes sense. We want to be known as a company full of experts. So there's a lot of different ways that they do that, both in how they support paying for your regular yearly laptops, or the time that they allow you to be involved in those projects, or extra time to speak at conferences and stuff like that. But I think the biggest way that they do that is by giving you a career path that doesn't mean you have to move away from the technology that you're really interested in. And yes, Excella is always hiring. Right now, I know we're specifically looking for data engineers and a data visualization developer. But we continually bring on new projects and bring in business analysts, data scientists, and pretty much everything running the data gamut. And certainly if anyone on this call is interested in connecting with me on LinkedIn and talking about what we have open at Excella and why I love working there, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Justin, any quick closing remarks or call to action? Though I think anyone who's been following the events here would know that Capital One is also always hiring.
I'll focus on the last part of the question. I'm reading here in the chat window. Like how do your companies do it? I think it's built into the Capital One culture. So that's like not a great answer for people that don't work at Capital One. Recommendations, like the thing I would tell everybody, ask, like that's where you have to start. You'd be surprised at how many leaders or organizations, if you just go ask, hey, I believe that there's value in investing in this thing that we don't do today. Can I carve 5-10% of my time off to invest in it? And you might have to pull from personal time. Maybe it's a little bit after hours where you invest in it further. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to basically get to a point where you can demonstrate that investing in learning is driving incremental value for the company. And so like you need to ask first. Hopefully they say yes. Work quickly towards delivering a near-term solution. Like, hey, I can show value in the thing that you just allowed me to invest in to develop a habit in the culture. If that doesn't happen in your company, then I'd ask yourself long and hard, like, am I at a company that values the thing that I value? If I value continual learning and education, like maybe you might not be in a company that values that as part of its culture, and it could be time to look somewhere else. But those would be the two things I would say there. But yeah.
Yep. Cool.
Hopefully
Thank you.
Helps. Hopefully that helps the group.
Yep. And George and Basil, same quick questions. Any very brief closing remarks and call to actions. George, any ways you want to highlight that people can get involved with No Kid Hungry or Deep Learning Adventures?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're actually also hiring. I'm looking for a cloud developer to join our team. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or other channels. And if you're looking to join a larger community to learn more about data science in general, and specifically about deep learning, join our Deep Learning Adventures meetup. But yeah, I agree with everything that Leslie and Justin said, so I'll hand it over to Basil.
Yeah, well, we're not hiring at the moment. I would say that our culture is very entrepreneurial. We don't really have a 9-to-5, so I don't think it'll be to the liking of a lot of people. It's really set up as a startup. So yeah, we're pretty devoted to the work we're doing.
Cool, thank you. And I think that concludes the panel. I just going to say that the company that I work for, ICA Global, is also currently hiring data scientists and data people of all sorts. So check out our LinkedIn page. Josh, any closing announcements?
I just want to thank everyone for being here. This was really a wonderful panel, and so excited about the different diversity of thought, and really would encourage anyone on this call to really reach out to us if you want to get more involved with Data Community DC, Data Visualization DC, Data Education DC, and Deep Learning Adventures. But this video will be shared out on the YouTube channels. So we will have a recording for this if you do want to go back and listen to it again. But thank you once again, everyone, for attending. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, members.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Josh.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And now I'm going to head over to the Data Ops DC meetup this evening, where they've got other great events going on. And I think there are at least half a dozen or more other awesome events this evening. So www.dataweekdc.com.